Hey survivors, it's Angie Atkinson, and today at queenbeing.com we're going to talk all about how triggers can be stopped in narcissistic abuse and recovery. So this morning we discussed, and I'll try to link to it up here for you, this morning we discussed triggers and what they are and how they happen. So now we're going to discuss exactly what we can do in order to resolve the triggers as you move forward. All right, so let's get started. My name is Angie Atkinson, and this channel is all about teaching you what I know to be true. You really can create the life you want. All right, so look, we already discussed the definition of triggers, but just to clarify, okay, a trigger is any event or object that reminds you of what you've been through and kind of makes it kind of come back for you a little bit, okay? If you'd like to know the full definition, like I said, watch that video that I did earlier this morning, okay? All right, so if you have PTSD or CPTSD, which is quite a possibility if you have been abused by a narcissist, whether you're still in the situation or not, you could experience different kinds of trauma or emotions that you had at the time of the abuse when you are triggered, all right? So first, let's really quickly discuss, what are the symptoms that you'll see from the triggers? What are some things that can happen? All right. Well, you may or may not relive the event. Okay. Not every time you have a trigger happen, it's not going to always cause the issue. You may be under a great deal of stress and it may cause the issue because of the stress. You understand what I'm saying? So, of course, in addition to that, to complicate matters, because nothing's easy, is it? You may or may not realize that you've experienced a trigger in the first place, right? So that is part of the reason I'm doing what I'm doing, because I'm trying to help you have information. When you have information, you can go forward with that knowledge and information, okay? So let's go here. Some of the symptoms, I'm just going to go through this really quickly, all right? You may have sudden or unexplained bouts of emotion, crying, screaming, unexplained, you don't know why they're happening, all right? You might be all of a sudden afraid. You might be paranoid. You might be dealing with panic attacks or various kinds of stress, anxiety. You might feel irritable. You might have thoughts that you can't stop. They just keep coming. You might be startled really easily, or you might, find yourself really tired or sick to your stomach. You might be, like I find myself really easily startled by noises. I feel shocked by them sometimes. Not any noise, but super loud, sudden noises really bother me. You might feel like you're hypervigilant, or like, your mind is always on alert for trouble in general. You might have certain unhealthy coping mechanisms, like if you're triggered and, let's say you've been in recovery for the last 5 years from alcohol. And maybe if you were triggered by something strong that happened to you during the abuse, maybe you drank some alcohol. That's just one bad example, but it is what it is, right? All right. So ultimately, the point, though, here is that when you're dealing with this kind of issue, a trigger, as it were, you have to learn how to handle it if you're going to be able to move forward in your recovery. So you can try to avoid certain triggers altogether, obviously, but you want to make sure that you don't diminish your own quality of life in the process. Okay, so you want to be focused on keeping your life good at the same time as you want to focus on making the triggers, relieving the triggers. Okay, so obviously certain things you can avoid, but sometimes you can't avoid everything. So I think personally that it's better if you learn how to identify the symptoms of a trigger instead of trying to stop yourself from experiencing those things. When you do that, you might find yourself locked in your house, not speaking to anybody. You know what I'm saying? So if you can recognize your behavior during the situation as a symptom of, or as a result of the trigger, then, you can say to yourself, okay, so I've been triggered. I know that these emotions are not real and they're not current. This is sort of a flashback, and then notice the way you feel. So I've been triggered by this issue and I feel really stressed out and upset, period. Okay. So, but the thing is that your brain needs to hear it. So you have to kind of remind yourself where you are now is a lot more important than where you were then, and you need to be focused on, this is where mindfulness comes in again, okay? So one of the things you can do is just take some deep breaths as long as it takes in order to, get it to you. All right, to get it through your head. Sometimes you need to take deep breaths. Focus on what's in the moment. Mindfulness. I've done videos on this before. I'll try to link to those for you. And sometimes you're going to readily identify the trigger, but other times you're not going to be able to. You won't know what happened. Okay, so I think that in general, identifying the trigger is not going to be quite as important as actually dealing with the symptoms of the trigger, because if you can get yourself back into a place of being calm and at peace and all these things, well, then you can get yourself back to reality. So it's really going to be important. So attempt to identify the trigger a little bit later, like after you get calmed down. All right. But I do think it's a good idea to identify them, just not in the middle of the mess, unless you already happen to know what they are. Okay. So you want to do something that makes you feel safe, something that makes you feel really good, happy, excited, all of these things. So know what it is that you consider safe. No, I like to tell everybody, have a plan for when this stuff happens, okay? For example, one of the things that I go over with a lot of my clients is, okay, now that you've gotten away from the narcissist, what are you going to do when you run into them in public? Because a lot of us get triggered by that, right? So if you know ahead of time what you will do if a certain type of trigger comes up, then you can have a plan in place, and then when that thing happens, you can begin to, take steps to fix it. All right. So you want to do something, like I said, that makes you feel better. It's really all about managing the situation. It's really all about dealing with the symptoms as part of a larger plan for narcissistic abuse recovery. So next time we talk, we're going to go into a little bit more about the plan. Next time we talk about triggers, we're going to go more into what the plan is and how you can get that started. So be ready for that. All right. Okay. So hidden trauma triggers are something that we don't really expect to see. Okay, we instead of recognizing what we're dealing with, a lot of times we might just, this is what I was talking about earlier when I said sometimes we don't know what the trigger is. Okay, well, these can cause symptoms that we might not recognize as symptoms. Okay, like we kind of talked back before about how the symptoms look, but when you're kind of going through this, you might think that you took a step back. Like my healing has slowed down for some reason. I don't know why, or I've gone backwards. I'm now experiencing this negative effect and I didn't have it before. Or maybe you think you're going through a depression, or you think that you fell back into your old behavior patterns, or that you dishonored, you think maybe your process has changed, or you need to change something, or you've done something bad, basically, and you can't quite put your finger on it. Well, you might also you might want to know that, these hidden trauma triggers have a lot more behind them, and they take a lot longer to recognize, okay? And they're going to last longer, and, they're going to be hard to recover from, a lot harder than your standard trigger. And, a trigger that you're aware of is it's a lot easier to resolve than a trigger you don't know exists, okay? And it can also affect more of your behaviors, unfortunately. I think a lot of times, especially children can feel this way, but even adults can feel this way and they won't know why. For example, I have this weird thing with my clothes where I'm like totally obsessed with finding the right thing to wear, and half the time when I'm getting dressed to do something, I take 57, not so much these videos, but like if I'm going out in public or whatever, I'll take 57 times to actually get the thing done, and it's incredibly frustrating. So I will, the point is that I have to remind myself, okay, this is some weird hidden trigger I have, and I don't know why, but there it is. So the triggers like this, they will cause longer term anxiety. They will be, like I said, something you kind of get obsessed about. It's not good. So you need to learn how to work through those. Okay. Now, if you're still being abused, your hidden triggers are a whole other ball of wax, because generally, you can't really experience hidden triggers if you're still being abused. The fact is that the reason we have those hidden, triggers is because the symptoms that we're dealing with are the same types of behaviors and feelings that the abuse causes, and so that's actually happening during the abuse. So if your symptoms at that point, they're actually not a result of a trigger, they're actually still a result of the abuse. The exception, of course, at that point is that victims who were abused by someone else, by their parent narcissist or some other narcissist in their life, they experience the triggers within the relationship based on the ex or former narcissist. And so if you're in an abusive relationship now, then the trauma triggers again are not the problem. It's the abuse that's your problem. So at that point you might want to be focusing on getting out, right? Okay, so hidden triggers are the result, or they do result in victims, survivors feeling much like they did while they were in the relationship. Bottom line. Okay, so if you believe you have triggers and you're still in the relationship, you're not actually dealing with triggers unless the triggers are related to a former narcissist. Does that make sense? Okay, so during the relationship, you might find yourself feeling depressed. You might have anxiety. You might have PTSD issues or symptoms, other kinds of issues, right? If your hidden trauma triggers are pulled during abuse or after, because like I said, during abuse it would only be a hidden trigger if it was related to former abuse, then you can have depressive episodes. You might feel depressed, you might feel upset, you might find that your anxiety goes way up, and then during recovery, you may experience depression and anxiety and everything else. But understand that you can also have during recovery, you might experience depression that is not related to recovery. You may be going through some other thing. It is possible that some of your issues aren't entirely because of narcissistic abuse. Okay, so just understand that there are chemical depressions that can happen. Okay, but the bottom line is that sometimes we experience depression during and after abuse as a result of going through the abuse and as a result of recognizing the abuse and seeing what we're dealing with. Do you understand what I'm saying? So this is something to be aware of as well. Okay, and when you can focus on the things that are happening in this moment, and when you can be mindful and you can focus on what it is that you need and want in this moment, it's a really big step toward dealing with triggers. Okay, look, I understand that anything could become a trigger, hidden or otherwise, and generally the trigger will cause large scale issues, like especially when it's hidden, and it can happen from an ongoing situation. If it is in regard to a former situation, here's an example. So one of my clients has an ex who is from a particular country that has a very noticeable accent, and whenever she hears that particular accent, she's triggered. Okay, so she's had to actively cultivate not being triggered by that. Some people like to use exposure therapy, some people there are lots of different ways you can do it depending on the trigger and what it is. Okay, so understand that sometimes, even though the abuse feels like it's not letting go of us, we do have choices, and we can make choices to change our beliefs. We can decide that we're going to move forward and we're going to stay in this moment and we're not going to focus on the past. When it comes up and catches up with you, give yourself a break, forgive yourself, tell yourself this is just a trigger and I'm really okay in this moment, and then focus on being in the moment. And if you feel yourself continuing to focus on, the triggers, start focusing instead on noticing them and overcoming them. It will make a difference for you. All right. The only way that you can actually fail at healing is, of course, by giving up. So keep your eye on the prize, my friend. Stay focused. Keep going. You got this. All right. Okay, I'm going to wrap up for right now. I'll try to get this video online within the next hour, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Thank you so much for being a part of my day and a part of my life, and thanks for letting me be a part of yours, all right? If you'd like me to continue the series on triggers, leave me a like and comment below, and I'll go into them a little deeper, all right? Thanks so much. Have a great day. It's my mission to teach others what I know to be true. You really can create the life you want. Take care of your body, take care of your soul, nurture the real you, and introduce him or her to the world. Be comfortable in your own skin and in your place in this world. Take your spot, take it now, and the universe will take its cue from you. You feel me? If so, subscribe to my channel. Let's get it done together.